The restaurant was loud in the way only Friday nights could be, a mix of clinking glasses, low laughter, and the steady hum of conversations overlapping each other. Warm yellow lights reflected off polished wood tables, and the smell of grilled meat and spices filled the air. At a small table near the window, a woman sat alone, slowly stirring a drink she hadn't really touched. She looked ordinary at first glance. Mid-30s, simple jacket, hair tied back, posture relaxed but alert in a way that was hard to describe unless you knew what to look for. Her name was Claire, and she had just finished a long day she didn't feel like explaining to anyone. She had chosen the seat deliberately, back against the wall, clear view of the entrance and most of the room. Old habits were hard to kill. Her eyes moved occasionally, not staring, just noting things. The couple arguing quietly near the bar. The waiter who kept forgetting orders. The three men who had come in together 10 minutes ago and were already too loud for the size of the place. They were sitting a few tables away, leaning back in their chairs, laughing too hard, drinking too fast. Claire noticed them the same way she noticed everything, filed them away, and returned her attention to the condensation sliding down her glass. The men noticed her too, though not in the same way. One of them nudged another, nodding subtly in her direction. They whispered, then laughed. It wasn't unusual, and it wasn't the first time Claire had been on the receiving end of that kind of attention. She ignored it, the way she had learned to ignore many things that didn't matter. She took a slow sip of her drink and glanced at her phone, not because she needed to, but because it was easier than making eye contact. Minutes passed. The restaurant grew louder. A birthday song erupted from the far side, and a server rushed by carrying a cake with candles flickering. The three men had finished another round. One of them stood up, wobbling slightly, and headed toward the restroom. On his way back, he slowed near Claire's table. Too close. She felt it before she saw it. He leaned in, resting a hand on the back of her chair as if it belonged there. "Hey," he said, voice thick with alcohol and confidence. "You here all alone?" Claire looked up at him calmly. Her eyes were clear, steady. "Yes." He smiled, the kind of smile that didn't reach his eyes. "That's a shame." "It's really not," she replied, turning back to her drink. He laughed, louder than necessary, and glanced back at his friends, who were watching with interest. "Come on," he said. "Don't be like that, we're just talking." "I'm not interested," Claire said, her tone even, controlled. He didn't move away. Instead, his hand tightened slightly on the chair. "You don't have to be rude." Claire slowly pushed her chair back just enough to stand if she needed to, though she didn't stand yet. She met his gaze again. "I've asked you to leave me alone." For a moment, something flickered across his face. Surprise, maybe, or irritation. He wasn't used to being spoken to like that. He scoffed and finally stepped back, throwing his hands up theatrically. "Whatever." He returned to his table, and the three of them burst into laughter, eyes still on Claire. She exhaled quietly, shoulders relaxing just a fraction. Situations like that usually ended there. Usually. A few minutes later, as she was paying her bill, the second man approached. This one was taller, broader, with a grin that suggested he thought he was charming. He slid into the empty chair across from her without asking. "My friend didn't mean any harm," he said. "We just thought you might want some company." Claire set her wallet down carefully. "I don't." He leaned forward, elbows on the table. Sure. You look like someone who could use a little fun." Around them, people were talking, laughing, unaware or unwilling to get involved. The waiter glanced over, hesitated, then kept walking. Claire felt the familiar tightening in her chest, not fear, but focus. "Get up," she said quietly. The man laughed. Or what? That was when the third man joined them, standing behind Claire, close enough that she could feel his presence without turning around. "Is there a problem here?" he asked, though his tone suggested he was hoping there was. Claire didn't raise her voice. She didn't look panicked. She didn't even look angry. She simply stood up slowly, turning so that all three men were in front of her now. "Yes," she said, "there is." The man behind her reached out, grabbing her arm, not hard enough to bruise yet, but firm enough to make a point. "Sit back down," he said. That was the moment. 15 seconds was all it took. Claire's body moved before her mind needed to catch up. Years of training had burned the responses into muscle memory. She twisted her arm sharply, stepping into the grip instead of away from it, breaking the hold with a sudden, efficient motion. At the same time, she drove her elbow backward into the man's ribs, hitting a precise spot that forced the air from his lungs in a violent wheeze. He staggered back, gasping. The man who had been sitting lunged forward, reaching for her shoulders. Claire stepped to the side, hooked his arm, and used his own momentum to send him crashing into the table. Glasses shattered, drinks spilled, and people nearby shouted in surprise. The first man, the one who had started it all, hesitated for half a second too long. Claire closed the distance, palm striking his nose with controlled force, not enough to kill, but enough to drop him to the floor in shock and pain. Blood appeared instantly, and he screamed, clutching his face. The entire restaurant froze. Claire stood there, breathing steady, eyes scanning automatically for new threats. The third man was on his knees, still trying to suck in air. The second was tangled with a chair, groaning and holding his arm at an unnatural angle. The first was curled on the floor, swearing loudly through blood and tears. "Call the police," someone shouted. The manager rushed over, wide-eyed and pale. What the hell just happened? Claire stepped back, hands open, making no aggressive moves now that the immediate threat was neutralized. "They assaulted me," she said calmly. Multiple witnesses. Silence hung heavy in the air, broken only by the injured men's groans. Phones were out now. People were whispering. Someone had already dialed emergency services. Within minutes, sirens wailed outside. 2 police officers entered, taking in the scene quickly. They separated everyone, asking questions. Claire answered clearly, concisely. She showed them the red mark forming on her arm where she'd been grabbed. Several patrons backed her up without hesitation, describing how the men had approached her, how she'd asked them to leave her alone. One of the officers looked at her with curiosity. "You handled yourself pretty well," he said. Claire gave a small shrug. "I've had some training." The paramedics arrived to tend to the injured men. As they were being loaded onto stretchers, one of them glared at Claire. "You think you're tough," he snapped. She met his gaze, unflinching. "No," she said. "I know I'm prepared." The police took statements, and eventually, the restaurant began to return to a shaky version of normal. Chairs were righted, broken glass swept away. People talked about what they'd seen, voices full of awe and disbelief. As Claire gathered her things, the manager approached her, still a bit stunned. "I'm so sorry that happened," he said. "Your meal is on the house. And, thank you for not letting it get worse." Claire nodded politely. "Thank you for calling the police." Outside, the night air was cool and quiet, a stark contrast to the chaos inside. Claire took a deep breath, letting the tension finally drain from her shoulders. She hadn't wanted attention. She hadn't wanted a fight. She had just wanted dinner. But sometimes, the world didn't give you that choice. As she walked toward her car, one of the officers caught up with her. "Ma'am," he said, "just out of curiosity, where did you learn to do that?" Claire paused, considering how much to say. Then she smiled slightly. "The Navy," she said. "Special operations." His eyebrows shot up. "Well," he said, impressed. "Remind me not to get on your bad side." She gave a small, tired laugh. "I don't like using it," she said. "But I won't hesitate." She drove home in silence, the city lights blurring past, thoughts drifting. She knew the story would spread. People would exaggerate it, argue about it online, turn it into something bigger than it was. For her, it was simple. Boundaries had been crossed. She had responded. If you're listening to this story and believe that strength doesn't always look loud, that courage can be calm and controlled, then you'll enjoy the stories we share here. Subscribe to the channel Her Stories World for more powerful, realistic stories of resilience, courage, and unexpected strength, because sometimes the most dangerous person in the room is the one everyone underestimates. That night, 3 men learned a lesson they would never forget. Not about violence, but about respect. And Claire went on with her life, as quietly and deliberately as she always had, knowing that 15 seconds was sometimes all it took to change everything.